let's start with, who are you? What has been your involvement in carbon tech, things that you've been looking at? Mariana.
Hi, I'm Mariana Sanko. I'm a co-founder at a new venture capital fund called Future Ventures. We just raised a $200 million fund, and our goal is to invest in things that we've never seen before that make the world a better place and don't prey on human frailty. My own background is recovering engineer turned to VC, and my background is in material science engineering. And so I spent a lot of time working with large chemicals and materials companies, being frightened about the ways in which materials change our world and how we use them, and we're, in some cases, how we don't know how to get rid of them. And so that is a core investment thesis that we think about in the future.
So I'm Tom Shi. I was one of the founding team members at Google X. I worked on self-driving car, Google Glass, some relatively hard tech, and a background in physics, electrical engineering, pretty good at understanding how hard things work. Yeah. So I've been placing investments in terms of the following thesis, which is how can you reinvent industry so that humanity becomes a net positive to nature? Right? That should be the target goal. There's a lot of little goals on the way there, but that should be the output of society eventually, that our existence on the planet makes the biosphere healthier every year because we exist. And I placed a number of investments kind of separately, angel, syndicate, and with venture capital relationships I have, but I'm in the process of forming my own fund. It's a $150 million fund that I'm raising right now. So there'll be a lot more capital.
I'm James Hartman. I'm a partner at Data Collective. The thesis of the fund is to invest in applied AI and deep technology. And so deep technology for me is companies where there's some kind of scientific or engineering innovation. So usually the asset that underpins the value that the company is going to generate is very clear. We've invested in a number of, I'd say, climate or carbon-related companies. You heard from one of them today, Opus 12, who was the first company to present. Advano, which is a high-capacity battery company. A stealth nuclear reactor company. And then a company called Pivot Bio, which is engineering microbes to pull nitrogen out of the air, to fixate nitrogen. And so something like 5% of the world's energy today goes into the production of fertilizer. And so this is, as you can imagine, very relevant to the climate.
Awesome. Gustav.
I am Gustav Alstromer. I am a partner at Y Combinator. I've been there for about a year and a half. So we've been around for a long time, funding software startups for 12, 13 years. And more recently, hard science, a lot more things than just software. About a year or so ago, we wrote something called Request for Startups around carbon removal. And since then, we got a lot of attention for funding carbon removal. But it's a small number of companies we fund among a large number of other companies. And we've funded companies that relate to climate change or solve climate change for quite some time before. So we've been doing this for a while. Carbon removal is sort of like a new area that we've been spending time looking at. And I make a distinction between carbon removal and climate, sort of decarbonization. I think two different things, but we can talk about it.
Mariana, you spent time at DFJ, Khosla, and Airbus's venture arm, and I'm working with Steve. I'm at Future Ventures. I'm pretty sure you see a lot of crazy entrepreneurs, and how do you and ideas, right? And how do you differentiate between the kind of the right about the right type of crazy between way too crazy is just not going to be practical, and obviously if anyone else has some thoughts on that.
I get to sit in this privileged position of don't build things anymore. I just get to help participate in other people building a beautiful world. A kind of game I like to play in my head is I walk into a pitch meeting and I'm a yes. I am absolutely investing in this company, no questions asked. And then I watch how many illogical, irrational, fundamental leaps I have to make in changing my base understanding of reality and first principle physics to maintain being a yes. And it generally goes one of two ways, where either I have to throw everything I know about, the physics and reality out of the window to stay at a yes, or an entrepreneur will present to me with a perspective that I go, that makes sense. I never thought about it that way. That's a fundamental shift in my thinking, and you have now provided me not only with a hypothesis, but interesting answers to the technical questions that don't evade the point, but actually drive it further home. And so I think it's a delicate balance, and I think all great ideas give you this sense of disbelief.
I'll just say evidence. So on the engineering or deep tech side, a lot of times we're commercializing, or companies are working on commercializing things that have been developed in a research lab. So I want to see the papers, I want to see that they've been validated in other labs. I'm not interested in funding scientific risk, but I will take kind of productization risk, go-to-market risk, scale risk.
Speaking of that, James, you funded Upstock, right? And I know, feel free to share as much as you feel comfortable with, but what was your, and what in those cases is your general due diligence process there? Like, what do you need to see? What questions do you ask? And how do you work with companies that, have a little bit of R&D before they hit the market?
Yeah. So with Open School, we did review literature. So we were interested in reading the papers that were published around a specific catalytic technique, kind of reverse combustion. We looked at kind of competing technologies, and we were very interested in, can this technology get to kind of positive unit economics? So even though this conference is about companies that are relevant to carbon economy or the climate change, I feel if a company leads with that, it's often a red herring. And so no one, or at least I won't invest in a company that isn't better, cheaper, faster, or helping their customers comply with some regulatory requirement.
Cool. So, Gustav, I was going to ask you about the request for startups in carbon removal, but so now I see there's two different things, and I think I confused them in the past, so maybe it would be good if you clarified it. There is the request for startups for carbon the removal technologies, and then there's the crazy roadmap for these are the things that could be happening and in which carbon in carbon sequestration. Am I right that there are two different things there? And then how do those more crazy ideas, ocean, desert flooding, and all the few things YC published about, how do they fit into the mainstream acceleration program?
To have a clear opinion in advance of what's going to work and not work would probably be a mistake here. So the carbon.ycommand.com is meant to inspire people to come up with new ideas, like radically different ideas to remove carbon from the atmosphere. The way so like when we look at the companies that apply, like you said, if they're purely research products and they either don't make a product that people want, or they don't remove carbon from the atmosphere at some price that's measurable, it's going to be tricky to see how to become a company or anything. So I think that's the distinction. But there are actually, and many of the companies are presenting actually fit into one of those two categories pretty easily. And I think the thesis that we have is that society will pay for climate change. They'll pay a lot because we all value it, and there will be lots of companies that are going to help us do that work. And those are the kind of companies that, like even a couple years ago, there was almost zero being funded. And then when I talk about carbon removal, we have to do two things. We both have to change and decarbonize all the things that we do, but we also have to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And there's a very small number of companies actually being funded doing that. So that's where the inspiration came.
With some of those, a quick follow-up, with some of those kind of projects that are more out there and maybe not ready to bring something to the market at price that at which the market exists, would you accept them as nonprofits, given that YC sort of accepts a few nonprofits every batch?
Maybe. I mean, I would argue that in many cases, for-profits is a better way to get what you're doing at scale. So maybe they actually work better as for-profits sometimes. If they really have to be nonprofits, then we have some nonprofits in every batch, and there's a very specific reason why we do that. I think of those cases, many of them could be very well be for-profits and fit into some of those carbon markets that we can talk about.
Understood. Tom, so you're both an inventor and an investor. What are the projects, or what are the ideas that were not mentioned today, or what are the things that are on your mind to solve this problem we have?
So the way I think about this is that this is like a mass transfer problem. There's basically 1 trillion tons of mass that's up in the atmosphere that's supposed to be down here. And that's actually a lot of stuff. I don't think that people recognize how much actual physical heavy stuff that is. So actually, a lot of you guys I like already disqualified because there's no way that you can put that much mass in the thing that is your target output. And that's okay. Like you may actually be a successful business. People might get their returns and multipliers. That's all fantastic. It doesn't mean that you're not investable. I'm interested in pulling 1 trillion tons of stuff down, right? And that's a very big well to land it. Now on the input side, you got to think about how quickly can you get the carbon in from such a diffuse state? Because you're at 400 parts per million. So it typically means that like kind of entropy is against you. You need to apply a lot of energy in order to go pull that stuff down. Or you need to do it with enormous surface area. Right, so you can achieve large mass flux either by having a little bit of draw over a huge surface area, or you can achieve mass flux by using a lot of energy and a tinier surface area and like putting blowers and every other kind of thing through it. And I basically look at those two things and say, great, those are the two ways to effectively get mass flux, and how effective are you at that mass flux? So if you get enough input and your target well is large enough to potentially hold, 100 billion, you don't need to do 1 trillion yourself. So like, let's aim for something real. No, the thing is we're going to add another 1 trillion in the next like 18 years. So like if we can't do in the 100 billion scale, it's a joke. Like I'm not trying to make anybody mad. It's like you can still investable companies. People will make money off of you. But it's like it's a joke relative to 2 trillion tons that we're going to have in 18 years.
Yeah, that's a really valuable way of looking at it. So thank you for that perspective. And tell us about.
I think I pass on almost everybody, but there's some great ones.
Tell us about bomb planting, 100,000
So I'm an
trees.
investor in biocarbon engineering. They use drones to go plant trees. We can plant 120 trees per minute at 1/10 of the cost that it would normally take to plant. The cool thing about a tree is that trees weigh between 2 to 20 tons at maturity. A tree is about 48% carbon by mass. So it means that 2 to 20 tons is basically a ton to 10 tons of carbon per tree once it actually gets to maturity. It means if you can plant 1 trillion of them, you got something interesting. 1 trillion basically is half the surface area of Brazil. So it takes a little bit of land, but we actually have way more land than that when we've cut down about 3.5 trillion trees, over human history. So we're just talking about putting back a little bit of what we cut down. And so far we've planted 10 million on 4 different continents. But we just closed our first multi-year, like multi-million-dollar contract to plant. So it's all good news on that front. Nice. So the ones I think I really go hard on, that's my point. Like the ones that could pull down 100 billion or more, I really go hard on. And that meant helping them raise millions of dollars, helping them close their first contracts, and seeing them through this process. So hopefully it's one of y'all.
Okay, so a question to all of you. We're talking about really hard things here, and often with large upfront capex, right, and also R&D investment. So how do you have any creative business models, to offer to entrepreneurs in this field, and how do you feel about the more gimmicky ideas to get the revenue early and kind of build a company from there and show some progress to investors who are still going to do the venture funding versus funding through with grants and or betting on getting that SoftBank money. Like how should entrepreneurs think of not dying in terms of not running out of money?
Well, for one, I think start with a plan that does better than market parity. So creating a fuel that is at the same or more expensive cost than what is available on the market today is not a business model that is solvent. And so I think that you always have to, as an entrepreneur, actually think about your business. To Tom's point, think about the actual control loop around it and run the math of what are your inputs, what are your outputs, actually do the full calculation. And if you're at market parity or worse, then come up with a better plan. Sorry, it's short and sweet, but.
Good points, good stuff.
I would say that probably all the things you mentioned, except for SoftBank, probably plays a role there. Like certainly grants plays a very important role in the early research phase. I think it's hard to try to, if you're in that research phase still and you don't know exactly who the customer is, it's like you probably shouldn't start a company at that point. You should really figure out what is actually the product that I'm making. Once you're there, I would actually argue that we need a combination of these really difficult projects that are more hard science that actually is a true innovation on say carbon removal, and we need the platforms through which you plug into to actually reach that market. And I see a lot of sort of like them being disconnected in some sense, where it's not that easy for any other companies to solve the percent today to actually reach sort of the people that would buy, say, carbon credits, or people that would, unless you're making actual product out of carbon, it's not that easy to reach your market today. So I think once you have those markets, you probably have more new technology plugging in, and you'll see sort of more of that working by itself.
What do you think about gimmicky ways of getting revenue early? Like essentially Airbnb, what do they sell with some sort of breakfast cereal, right?
Yeah.
How?
I don't believe that you should try to sell an intermediate idea because that big idea is too hard. You should go after the big idea right away, and hopefully you'll find investors that are going to believe in that big idea. I wouldn't try to do something intermediate because it's too ambitious.
Yeah, a lot of these things involve hard science. You can't gimmick yourself out of that part of it. Like if you're in like a B2C like web service space, you can gimmick your way into all kinds of things. You're like, well, I believe, and all I need to do is click on things I believe in, and we're fine. But if your basic hard science doesn't work, there's no gimmick.
How much time do you spend thinking about the unintended consequences of some of the things you're funding, and do you ask entrepreneurs about it?
A lot.
Yeah, a lot.
I briefly worked on a project, a public health project many years ago, and we delivered mosquito nets to Equatorial Guinea for pregnant mothers, and we did this fantastic job reducing infant death rate. And what ended up happening is 2 years later, toddler death rate skyrocketed. And it skyrocketed we did a worse job for the population on net average statistically. It was a really hard lesson to learn that even with the best intentions, you sometimes have catastrophic effects if you don't think through the long term. Right, these are multi-layered, complex systems, and you're never going to know all of the unintended consequences, but that was a case where we could and should have thought much harder than we did. It was not a venture business or anything along those lines, but that lesson was hard to learn, and I carry that weight and that guilt, and I think about it going forward.
One thing in terms of being able to gravitate towards something that works is like relative to the health of the biosphere and humanity's relationship to the biosphere, we have really good working precedents. We actually know what a super healthy ecosystem looks like, and it actually generates a huge amount of bio output for the energy and air and water that it has access to. So to the extent that the work that we do, is successive approximations moving in that direction, that's generally a good thing. And this is why people are so scared of geoengineering. It's like that is fully different. And it doesn't mean that there isn't some other stable node there, but it's a stable node we've never seen before.
What solutions are you looking to fund?
I guess I'd go back to ones that unit economics are positive. There's clear defensibility, and they solve like an acute pain point for the customer. So I don't think there's anything. I think all of the traditional wisdom around starting a business still applies to all of the companies in this space, and I would just continue to push on those.
Share something you believe to be true about carbon tech that is not yet common knowledge.
I was going to say I want to take the other side of Tom's comment. I'm concerned that a lot of the incremental solutions will not be enough to solve the problem that we created for ourselves, and so we're going to find ourselves needing to take radical action, like geoengineering, on a large scale in order to, desperately keep our ecosystems from spiraling out of control. I haven't seen anything yet that I think has the ability to slow that down.
It's not that I didn't look at it, and I actually have these parameters for if you were to do geoengineering, here's the rules that you would follow so you'd have the best likelihood of not destroying everything. But the likelihood of destroying things is still higher than actually driving for true ecological resilience. And ecological resilience is valuable anyway because we will experience many decades of climate instability no matter what happens. So like more stable, resilient ecosystems will be better anyhow for what's coming.